patterns are there. This is Eyes on Intel.
It is Thursday, May 21st, 2026, and the federal enforcement grid is running hotter than ever. But we are here to track the plumbing underneath, to pull the blueprints they desperately want to keep hidden. There is a fresh piece of graffiti on a brick wall at the intersection of Lyndale and Franklin right now in Minneapolis. It simply says, "Cash ruins everything around me." It is a twist on an old Wu-Tang lyric, but in 2026 it is the absolute defining truth of the federal enforcement grid. We are pushing straight down into the plumbing today to uncover the infrastructure operating beneath the systems they want you to see. It starts on the surface with direct kinetic pushback, but not in the way the mainstream media portrays it. Out in Durango, Colorado, a growing network of community volunteers are taking early morning shifts at local school bus stops. They are acting as confirmers, actively monitoring for federal vehicles to warn immigrant parents and children before agents can execute warrantless arrests. This isn't just passive neighborhood watch observation, this is organized community defense. They recognize that the point of maximum vulnerability is the morning routine, because early morning tactical deployments are standard operating procedure for fugitive operations teams. They strike when families are divided and rushing. So the community is inserting themselves directly into the operational timeline to break the element of surprise. But that community defense is now facing a massive escalation from the highest levels of the Department of Homeland Security. They just launched a massive PR blitz yesterday built around a custom URL, wow.dhs.gov. It stands for Worst of the Worst. It is a newly engineered public-facing database explicitly designed to publicly track and showcase undocumented individuals with criminal records. But the true intent behind this architecture isn't informational. It is psychological warfare. The system is built with state-level sorting functionality, allowing users to literally type in their state name to generate a localized hit list of quote-unquote public safety threats. They are weaponizing this data to batter states and sanctuary cities that refuse to cooperate. And we saw the first wave of that attack yesterday in Virginia. DHS published a highly politicized press release demanding Governor Abigail Spanberger not release a specific individual from Franklin County, but they didn't stop there. They used the release to publish a laundry list of a dozen recent federal arrests across the state to publicly bash the termination of Local 287G agreements. They are turning local arrest data into a national cudgel. And while people physically shield their neighborhoods on the ground, the administrative battles are bypassing the agency entirely in the federal courts. A new data analysis reveals that over 450 habeas corpus petitions have been filed recently across 4 Midwestern states, focusing heavily on Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska. But the true scale of this legal counteroffensive is much larger. Up near that same graffiti in Minnesota, they just formed a dedicated habeas project to combat the recent wave of detentions carried out under Operation Metro Surge and Operation Paris. They have facilitated over 1,000 filings in that region alone since December. This is a precise legal maneuver utilizing an 800-year-old constitutional tool to challenge and bypass mandatory detention protocols under the Fifth Amendment. What we are looking at is a massive shift toward mandatory holds. The agency is utilizing AI-automated risk flags that scan digital histories and social media to instantly label individuals as high risk, effectively reclassifying longtime residents and DACA recipients as arriving aliens under Title 8 U.S. Code Section 1225. This bureaucratic reclassification intentionally strips away their right to a standard bond hearing before an immigration judge. So advocates are bypassing the immigration courts entirely and filing emergency habeas petitions directly in Article 3 federal district courts. They are arguing that you cannot hold people indefinitely without bond based on a flawed algorithm. And the data shows this offensive is working. The vast majority of these cases have resulted in federal judges ordering the immediate release of the detained individuals, forcing the government to either grant a bond hearing within days or release them outright. The agency is fighting back aggressively in appellate courts like the 8th and 6th Circuits to close this loophole, because they know that if federal judges systematically dismantle their mandatory detention framework, their entire logistical pipeline collapses under the weight of its own unconstitutional momentum. But those local battles are getting incredibly complex as the federal government tightens the financial screws. Down in Texas, the Austin City Council just quietly executed a brilliant act of malicious compliance regarding their police department's general orders. Governor Greg Abbott threatened to pull $2.5 million in public safety grants if Austin didn't fall in line with Senate Bill 4 and force their officers to cooperate with federal immigration enforcement. So the city revised its policy, changing the language from saying officers may contact federal agents to saying they should contact them. But they added 3 crucial words when operationally feasible. Councilman Chito Vila immediately went on the record pointing out a staggering loophole. The Austin Police Department is currently short 300 officers, so taking time off active patrol to sit and wait for a federal agent to arrive is inherently not operationally feasible. They technically complied with the governor's demands while practically giving every single officer the immediate justification to completely ignore federal detainer requests to prioritize 911 calls. And the human cost of maintaining that pipeline is hitting a breaking point down in Texas, inside an El Paso detention facility. 9 independent medical experts have gone on the record regarding a 23-year-old Guatemalan woman, stating unequivocally that she is being wrongfully denied urgent surgery for a severe ovarian cyst. These external doctors' assessments directly contradict the sanitized diagnoses provided by the agency's internal medical staff. This is what systemic medical neglect looks like when it is disguised as bureaucratic protocol. The internal medical corps is fundamentally not designed for patient care. It is designed for liability risk mitigation and cost suppression, isolating detainees from specialized external medical intervention until it is an absolute catastrophe. These 9 doctors are putting their credentials on the line to expose a shadow medical system that routinely overrides life-saving procedures to keep operational costs down. To understand how medical neglect on that scale is funded, you have to look at the money driving the enforcement grid right now. You have to look at the text of the massive $72 billion reconciliation bill just released by the Senate Judiciary and Homeland Security Committees. This package is a massive circumvention of the regular government funding process, using a parliamentary budget trick to bypass the 60-vote Senate filibuster threshold. This comes on the heels of a crippling 75-day DHS shutdown that began earlier this year following the fatal shootings of Renee Good and Alex Pretty by federal officers in January. Lawmakers blocked standard funding bills for weeks in protest of those killings. So leadership pivoted to reconciliation, a fast-track process that only requires 51 votes to force the funding through. The numbers in this text are staggering. They are allocating $38.2 billion exclusively for immigration and customs enforcement, alongside another $26 billion for Customs and Border Protection, including $3.5 billion earmarked entirely for border security technology and digital screening. This is lump-sum multi-year funding guaranteed through 2029, with absolutely zero meaningful congressional oversight or reporting guardrails attached. Lawmakers have consistently rejected bipartisan bills that would fully fund all DHS agencies, including the Coast Guard and TSA, because they excluded this massive expansion for federal enforcement. They are pushing all their chips into the center of the table on this $72 billion package, utilizing a legislative shortcut to build an enforcement apparatus that operates completely outside the bounds of judicial transparency and basic medical oversight. Yet the internal debate currently stalling this massive enforcement bill isn't about human rights or fiscal responsibility. It is an internal legislative holdup centered on several senators pushing back against a very specific $1 billion carve-out hidden deep inside the text. This money is being routed to the Secret Service for what they are calling the East Wing Modernization Project. It is designated for above-ground and below-ground security features specifically tied to a highly controversial White House ballroom project. They are fighting internally over luxury ballroom renovations, while simultaneously attempting to strip billions away from domestic safety net programs to offset the cost. The disconnect between the staggering funding allocations and the reality on the ground is absolute. The Center for American Progress published a scathing policy piece late yesterday, explicitly condemning this $70 billion reconciliation package as a slush fund that actively redirects national wealth away from affordability programs to fund shadow enforcement. And that reliance on deeply embedded corporate contractors is creating catastrophic failures on the ground that they are desperately trying to cover up. Down at Camp East Montana in El Paso, the nation's largest detention facility, the agency publicly announced in March that they fired the prime contractor running the camp amid severe allegations of medical neglect, deaths in custody, and a measles outbreak. The agency praised the arrival of a new contractor promising higher standards of medical care to the press. But what they didn't disclose, and what investigative reporters at the Project on Government Oversight just uncovered, is that they quietly kept the exact same subcontractor to provide the actual medical care. A company called Loyal Source Government Services. This is a corporation holding over $2 billion in lucrative federal contracts, despite a track record of systemic medical neglect. A devastating 226-page government report published by the Senate Judiciary Committee identified systemic breakdowns in how Loyal Source staff managed patient records. Whistleblowers cited in the report exposed that the company's providers frequently ignored the electronic medical records system entirely, relying instead on loose paper records because of understaffing and outright ignorance of the system. Yet despite the fact that the company has been sued 22 times since 2017 for alleged labor law violations and mistreatment, paying out over $5.2 million in out-of-court settlements, they were quietly retained to run the medical ward where at least 3 people have died in recent months. They are laundering a disgraced medical provider through a new prime contractor to keep the machine running without having to actually fix the broken plumbing beneath the floorboards. Cash ruins everything around me. They are building these shadow structures because they are terrified of the light. Because they know that when communities actually see the blueprints, they know exactly how to dismantle them. This fight is fought in the details, in the contracts and the court filings and the early morning shifts at the bus stops. Keep tracking the data, keep watching out for each other out there. And as always, remember, open hearts, open minds. The pushback against this reallocation of national wealth hit the streets of Washington, D.C. yesterday. Advocates, working families, faith leaders, and groups like the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund marched from agency headquarters straight to the U.S. Capitol. It is the fund care, not ICE mobilization. They are pressuring Congress to reject this $71+ billion enforcement expansion, demanding those funds be redirected to health care, food assistance, and working families. They are actively rallying alongside members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, including Representatives Delia Ramirez, Ana Lilia Mejia, and Rashida Tlaib, to illustrate the devastating impact of last year's billion-dollar cuts to domestic programs. They are pointing out that thousands of individuals and families are already losing Medicaid, food access, and Affordable Care Act coverage because that money was siphoned off to fund the expansion of immigration enforcement agencies and corporate tax cuts. Representative Ayanna Pressley just led another massive rally nearby demanding the immediate closure of the Dilley Detention Center, attacking the core logic of family detention protocols. This march is the physical manifestation of the ideological war happening on paper, a demand to stop pulling the financial foundation out from under the working class to build a shadow enforcement grid. They are trying to break the cycle before the Senate marks up the bill this week, before that $72 billion gets locked in through the end of the decade, and before the ice gets thick enough to freeze the entire system solid. And as they try to freeze the oversight mechanisms protecting the physical facilities, they are simultaneously outsourcing the very architecture of their surveillance operations to avoid public accountability entirely. A request for information just dropped for the enforcement and removal operations, specifically under the Law Enforcement Systems and Analysis Division, revealing that the agency is preparing to hand a private contractor the keys to its technological future. This isn't just a standard procurement contract for a specific digital tool. They are outsourcing the strategic decision-making that will determine exactly what technologies the agency buys, builds, and deploys next. This is a massive shift in how the technological backbone of federal enforcement is structured. They have already awarded tens of millions in contracts for facial recognition, large-scale data aggregation, and biometric systems. But now they are tasking a private vendor to identify enterprise-level gaps and develop problem statements, meaning a private corporation will define the operational realities and legally justify the future tech acquisitions for a federal enforcement agency. The timelines built into these internal documents indicate extreme pressure from leadership to move this pipeline quickly. Transition in requirements anticipate full staffing within days of the award, and the modernization effort comes with stringent data ownership mandates. All program data must be machine-readable and accessible within 24 hours of request, using application programming interfaces to facilitate efficient system-to-system data sharing. What this means practically is that they are rapidly integrating legacy silos to expand internal data fusion, but by outsourcing the strategy to a private firm. They are creating a structural shield when a private vendor defines the enterprise modernization priorities. It obscures the influence being exercised at the problem definition stage before the procurement even happens. This is how you build a shadow architecture. You let a contractor design the blueprint so the federal agency can claim they are just following vendor-neutral analysis while rapidly expanding their biometric tracking footprint.